my pleasure to have a conversation this evening, and you've all seen my notes now, with Reginald Sylvester. So welcome, thank you so much for being here. Is this your first trip to Kansas City?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so we took care of the barbecue questions.
So good, so
question
good.
and answer period last night. At one of the many spots. We won't have to get into that conversation because I know everyone has their personal favorite, but we had a lovely evening and some conversation, and so just kind of piggybacking on some of those ideas that we were sharing. I think about abstraction a lot at the museum. I think a lot of other artists who have visited here have thought about abstraction as well. Pepe Mar is influenced by this Hans Hofmann painting, and there's a lot of kind of touchstones. This Helen Frankenthaler work is here in the space. And so there's a history of abstract work here in the collection, which I think is one of the reasons why I got so excited about having the museum have a dialogue with your work, because it's important to kind of our history here in the space. But I wanted to see what drew you to abstraction, and when and if this kind of shift, when did this shift happen for you? And what are some of your thoughts about working in that field?
Well, first I want to say thank you, Erin, for having me, and to the Kemper for allowing me to have this presentation here. Abstraction. In the beginning of my career, the beginning of me becoming a maker, I went to the Met for the first time when I moved to New York, and went into the abstract expressionist wing and saw the many greats, Twombly, de Kooning, Helen, a few other artists, Rothko, and it was kind of like super heroic for me to see or to learn about one individual living their life, making these many different works, whether it be paintings or works on paper, and kind of like, leaving the earth, but leaving all this energy for us to experience. And so not only just that, but the aesthetical things about abstract painting resonated with me, but also reading about de Kooning talking about finding an image. And for me at that time, I was trying to find ways to make new images or come into finding my voice as a painter. And so I thought that abstraction could be that way for me, right? And also when he spoke about that, it reminded me of like having this like painterly way of faith where, we all are living our lives trying to live the best life we can live with hopes when we leave, we get to this heaven. And so for me, finding my way through making an image and coming to this kind of pictorial heaven, it kind of resonated with me. So, I don't think I really landed into making true abstract paintings until 2019. So I had a lot of time to, put my hours in the studio to find my way to start making my first abstract paintings.
It's kind of interesting, like when you speak about the kind of lineage of artists and experiences that we have, those stories really start to resonate when you hear about like impactful exhibitions that you've seen in the past. I think we were talking a little bit earlier about Jasper Johns' Gray works.
Yep.
And Reggie and I had seen that same exhibition at different places at different times, and I think it impacted us differently. But I think that one of the things that really resonated in terms of how your practice developed is that there's a really kind of out there dialogue with abstraction, like a fearlessness to engage with some of the same types of like cousin-like mark making that so many artists have engaged with. But I think that one thing that is really special is that when you look at an artist's trajectory, there's like these structural principles at work. I think when you consider a Hofmann, for example, like he was such a innovator in terms of really kind of separating those colors within the same canvas, giving them space to breathe and allowing some negative space to reside within them. And that's something that didn't show up in a lot of his students' works. They showed up in a different way. They're like having a conversation with something that they learned. And Frankenthaler kind of structurally set up for herself a way to stain a canvas outside of a stretcher bar experience and let it soak into the canvas in ways that were, just blew abstract painting apart in some sense. And so what I noticed in your work is that there are structural elements at play. There's an interest in using materials that are not linen, that are not necessarily regular fiber-based canvases, but you're using the language of painting through the stretcher, and you're able to create these marks that are in dialogue with a lot of these other artists that you had been looking at. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the structural elements in your work and how you kind of arrived at exposing parts of the stretcher bar and how rubber came into play in terms of a medium that you wanted to explore with.
Yeah, like I want the basis of my practice to be abstract painting or gestural painting to exist always within my practice, because I think also that's just what I'm a fan of. But also too, it's like I feel that we're in a time where abstraction also is kind of you want to do more than just use the essential materials to make paintings. And so I started thinking about ways in which I can use excess materials in order to impede into my painting practice, and start using different things where I can start peeling into assemblage or just working materials that have exterior histories. And then when I finished that part, I could still kind of speak to the lineage of abstraction through painting. I started to just rummage around hardware stores and I'm big on like shopping for vintage and going to different vintage shops, and started to look for materials that I could bring into the studio. The military tent shell halves or pup tents, just that material in itself. And my dad was in the Marines, so when I started coming across that material, it felt really natural for me to kind of bring it into the studio and start to paint on it. And the rubber, coming across that in hardware stores and finding it on rolls, I immediately thought, oh, this is maybe something I could use. At the beginning, I didn't, I was kind of afraid to use it, but once I kind of saw the way I can kind of bring those two materials together and how acrylic paint existed on it, it started to work itself out. The cut really came from me trying to mimic a gesture that happened within the painting, but at that time, I was collecting these old West African heirlooms that are like these torque-to-lips anklets, thinking about Sarah and his torque-to-lip sculptures, thinking about Tadao Ando and how he would cut out the ceilings within his, interiors and things like this, and kind of taking that knowledge or those references and kind of bringing it into the artworks, but more importantly, just wanting the works to feel more than just like paintings. I wanted them to feel like these ready-made objects that are hanging on the wall, or these kind of like kind of totems, if you will. I think about these offerings in a sense of where, like, usually when people go and see artworks, the energy within the painting is reflected on you. But I want these paintings to kind of absorb maybe things that people are going through, and they charge, the human or the viewer charges the work. And so I think me being able to kind of cut into the substrate or cut into the painting and show the substrate, it just allows the pictures to be more than just paintings.
As we kind of like go through these different layers of abstraction, abstract expressionism, like there is a bit of a layer that's quite personal of yours as well. Like when we were visiting at the studio, you were talking about that a lot of the materials that end up onto the surface are things that you find in and around your studio that are kind of interacting with the paintings at that time. So it feels like there's like this layer of maybe something, a personal layer, and then there's like this kind of broader universal kind of space to engage with, but you've left us a bit of a window open to sort of like slip into, so sort
Yeah.
of like have a, have some kind of reflection onto in a lot of ways. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that experience of injecting some of your personal experiences into the works themselves.
Yeah, for me, putting materials that are like laying around the studio or that are left over, it makes the work very site specific, right? So you kind of get a sense of like what my studio is like, what debris is in there, what materials I'm using to maybe use to make the painting opposed to what you kind of see. And they also kind of come into the works as like these sculptural elements that add to the work as well. But I kind of think about it in this way where I was fortunate enough to have this conversation with Frank Boland's son, and we were talking about black folk and just being in certain situations through time, repurposing leftovers and like making something really significant out of it. And so I feel like, he said this like term, painting as soul food, right? And so it's like, I think it is something magical about being able to kind of take what's left over and repurpose it to make something that feels significant, or kind of take debris and make it, bring it to another level. And so I try to do that with them in the studio and within my practice. And I think also doing that also lets me or guides me into new ideas and new concepts and new ways in order to make paintings or sculpture, the debris in my studio informing maybe new gestures I can make within newer paintings.
So before we move on to the new series, this is the work that a private collector who we now have a relationship with gifted to the Kemper Museum. So we're extremely grateful to have this work in the collection. So this exhibition was built off of like the impetus of this particular work, and in the future, our next exhibition here is an abstract exhibition, and those two exhibitions will be having a conversation with each other across the space in which this particular object is of great importance. And this is, just to give a sense of scale and the different methods and ways in which Reggie's kind of moving the canvas around the space, just to have an install shot. You had talked a little bit about finding things that seem mundane or things that seem like you'd pass them by, but giving them new resonance and new life. And I think that's a great way to lead into the Green Gate and how this object actually became something that you were able to kind of scratch farther into the surface of and dig a little bit deeper. And what you sort of extracted from that was this understanding of green in a different way that's been expressed in the paintings that are in this exhibition. So
yeah,
what is up with this door? Why is it so special?
Yeah, it was like I like I just started like taking these walks around my neighborhood in Brooklyn, and I would come across this Green Gate, and I think immediately I was like, there's not often you kind of come across something and it's just freshly painted. Everything's got like maybe a tag on it or it's old and there's things. But this gate, either they're repainting it all the time or it's just like nobody's scared to touch this thing. But it made me pay attention to the color green in such a way. And I started to think about, I was like, okay, like what is the color green and how does it associate with black bodies or black or brown individuals? And when I started looking those things up, it started talking about how when black bodies are pretty much scanned or what's the proper term for it? I don't know if it's like not radioactive scan, but yeah, like radiology or picking up tones that the black and brown body give off. The black body is the body that gives off all tones, but the only one that is there but that's not visually present is green. And it just made me think about the soul. And like for me, my practice is about, I think abstraction is a spiritual practice, and I would hope that when people see the work, they have this like spiritual connection with it, right? And so I just started peeling off into the studio and making these green paintings and really, trying to figure out, what my personal relationship with green is, working with different hues of it. And I came into these works. This offering Dziedzic was the second work that I kind of came into while working on the offering series. And I started with a sweep of works on paper first. But yeah, that kind of like, spiked my interest. And it also kind of gave way for me to move into a new color when trying to make or attempting to make monochrome paintings. And yeah, I've kind of, I've been lost in it for some time now. I'm just now kind of segueing out of it in the studio. But I really just was interested about the pitch of a color and like how one can use one color in order to get different feelings and different emotions out. So I've brought this up to you like 4 or 5 times, but even looking at this work by Helen and the way she's used blue or different hues of blue and the different feelings you can get from that work. I'm essentially trying or attempting to work out different feelings and emotions or even pitches with working with one singular color. And I like that word pitch because pitch usually refers to sound, right? And so, I don't know, trying to hit the different pressure points with green thus far.
Trying to hit the right note.
Yeah, trying to hit the right note.
I mean, speaking of that though, like what you're saying, like in terms of talking about how the layers unpack themselves, and I've looked at this painting a lot, and we have another Frankenthaler in the museum's collection as well. That is a bit of a sister piece to this particular work. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I think is so lovely about it is that the longer time you spend with it, like things start to shift and change, and like right before your eyes, even if you're not moving, it's like you're sort of then inside of it, navigating it in a way that you maybe wouldn't have expected from just a distance or kind of passing by it or something like that. That has its own gratifying experience, but to sit with it and kind of unpack it, what you were talking about earlier in terms of there being a color that's there but you can't see it. Mm-hmm. And it's like about, giving yourself that, like, cracking yourself open, giving yourself that space to then, register, like be able to like register and feel the things that you maybe were either pushing back before or not, just not experiencing. And I think it says a lot about how your work kind of, there's a layering there, and there's a way that kind of, there's hidden parts behind the different mediums and behind the different fibers that I think, again, if you sit with it, you start to think more about the color green and it being beyond the gate.
Absolutely.
Gate's open, right? I mean, that's why we have them. There's things in there.
Yeah, absolutely. These paintings definitely are, it's been teaching me about just using color in certain ways. And I think earlier works in my practice, I was kind of leaning on working with multiple colors, but now really focusing on one color and really trying to unpack, these different pitches or tones that I can hit with it. How can I mute my palette or simplify my palette and still kind of get across, these energies that I'm trying to convey. And so from Dziedzic 02 to now looking at this work here, this is where I really started to mute my palette. And actually when I started thinking about John's a lot, because he had that exhibition where he's just using gray. And then also too, this is me bringing in the different elements in the studio, leftover paper towels, rope, leftover cuts of rubber, and bringing it in to the work, and thinking of also too like my drawings and how my drawings can influence the way in which I'm letting these remnants move around the surface of the painting as well too.
You talked about series, and it sounded like there was a bit of a time frame you give to yourself in terms of, or is it a number of works? Like what? This is a very practical question, but I'm kind of thinking about it in the recent trajectory of like moving from monochromatic red paintings to then looking at these abstract expressionist marks in green, and then like stripping them of that and giving a very minimal sense of green.
Yeah.
Is there a structure that exists within your studio that says, I'm going to be working on this series right now, and then I move into this other series? Do they ever kind of overlap each other?
I think when I get to a work and I'm like that work, and I'm like looking at the painting or the image or whatever, and I'm thinking that works, something tells me like, okay, I know how to do this. How can I, what can I take from this, and how can I move into something new? And I think every 4 to 8 paintings, there's like a learning curve within my practice where some new concept or some new idea or some new gesture arises where I'm like, okay, I can kind of peel off and do something totally different. And I think that's why Dziedzic 02 is the only one like that, because I was like, I could just live in this in this tone and make a few of these. But how about I mute my palette and make it a little more washed out, and will this image still, or will this color still be as impactful as like this kind of emerald green image? And then they started to actually be some of my favorites, these, because they just feel a little more drowned and washed out and stark, opposed to Dziedzic 02. So I think for me, it's like I try not to get, anytime I'm feeling a little bored within the studio and something feels like it works, I'm like, I need to make a shift. I need to try to push.
Do you feel like you have to push it to the point where you exhaust like your ability to even use that color anymore?
Yeah, well, I stuck in green for some time. I didn't make, when I had the show at the Gantt and I made the first offerings, I only made red offerings. But I think with these green works, or the Green Gates paintings, I made gestural works and I made offering paintings. And I think I was just struggling. Working with green was difficult in the beginning. I was like, okay, I can make an offering, but how can I move into a gestural work and make one? And then it started to also, me working with this particular palette started to also teach me something in which the way I'm using the line within the gestural works and how I'm moving energy throughout the painting too. So I just was like caught in that space for so long, or I guess it wasn't that long, but for me it felt so long because so many works kind of came out of that. Now that I'm just now moving into different works, but
you title a lot of for several of the paintings offerings.
Yeah.
Can you talk about their offerings, and then there's like a number after
each
of them?
Yeah. So the first offering I made, I was in the midst of making the works for the Gantt exhibition, and I think a selection was made of works that I was supposed to show, and a shift came. I think I made a painting, and I actually covered the whole painting up, and I was like, oh wow, this feels a lot different than what I've made before, and then once that happened, it kind of gave me the idea to go, okay, now if I'm using rubber, this material is not meant for me to kind of try to make a gestural painting on. I think this is meant for me to make something more minimal. And when I made the first offering, it's a darker painting that's in the studio. I got very excited, but I also got very scared because I thought I felt like I arrived at something that felt very new and exciting for me, but would that, how would that be, received, or, and so anyway, I thought about this is like the best work that I've made. It was like a breakthrough for me in the studio, and I felt like, I think I'm always thinking about post-apocalyptic themes within my work, and biblical themes and all of that is very much so a part of the narrative with my work. But I was thinking, if the sky cracked open tomorrow and like God was to ascend from heaven, like what would be my offering to him? And it would be this. It would have been that work. And so instead of giving each work these like individual titles, I just thought, okay, this body of work where I'm using rubber, I would title offering paintings. And so each series, I just offering 1, offering 2. Sometimes they'll get a name. I made a red offering and it was titled offering the number in Sling Blade, but yeah.
We did talk about movies quite a bit yesterday.
Yeah.
That's fine. So these are a couple of installation images of the show that you'll see in like 5 minutes. But one of the things that I wanted to end with was kind of some exciting news about Reggie's practice, is that you decided that you would start making some sculpture.
Yep.
And I'm, you know, for me, and when I look at this and the way that you see it in the exhibition, I could see a lot of communication and similarities between the paintings and the sculpture in shape and the way that you've treated the surface of the metal. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about this debut part of your practice. Like, I mean, this is one of those moments where like there's something super fresh and new coming out of the studio, and it's like it's now placed in a space where people get to see it, but it's something that you've kind of been cultivating for a little while. How did that become part of your practice, or something that you even wanted to kind of step into?
Well, I've always wanted to, I feel like some of my favorite exhibitions are from artists that make paintings, they make drawings, they make sculpture. You know, they're kind of like, you know, they're able to take their sensibility and apply it throughout different materials. And so for me, I've been, you know, itching to find that for myself. And I'm not a taught sculptor at all, but I think, you know, again, that's why this kind of process of like repurposing material in the studio has informed my paintings so much, but it also informs sculpture, because these forms come from leftover cutouts that you see in the offering paintings. And so I keep everything. And when I was laying these like leftover materials on the floor, I was like, this really reminds me of the floor plans of the boats using the transatlantic slave trade. And I thought about, you know, my ancestors, pretty much, you know, the resilient ones that jumped off, you know, off those ships, and their bodies sunk, but their souls ascended. And it made me think about how I could take those vessels that cause so much trauma and pain, and if you elevate those, you know, they can speak to, you know, this spiritual ascension, and you know, getting them structured out of steel, and then making this wood plinth to hold the forms. You know, it kind of arrived at this like unique shape that I could lean into as far as sculpture. And the reason I call them gates, not only is it making me think about these souls kind of entering into heaven, but it's like this scripture in Revelations 21 and 12, I believe, or 22 and 12, where it talks about these 12 gates. And so it kind of like had that kind of connectivity to that as well. And so, yes, it's a really exciting thing. I think these sculptures for me are really great, because they've also have now been informing how in which I'm going to move into newer paintings that are in the studio. You know, working with patinas and the firing process on the plinths. And so, yeah, I'm really excited that you know, you wanted to include this into the show as well, because I've been meaning to, you know, show how, you know, the paintings reference sculpture, and how the sculpture can also reference what's going on in the paintings too.
And also kind of, it really becomes part of the dialogue of like, you know, monument conversations, and, you know, how this is, you know, in your way of honoring and elevating, like, I don't know, it makes me think that this could be large and public.
Yes. Yes.
And so I'm just throwing that out there. But thank you so much. I think what we'll do is, if there are any questions for Reggie, we'll take a 10 or 15 minutes to do that, and then we'll move into the continued celebration of your Green Gate exhibition. So
thanks.
Yeah.
I hope there's lots of questions.
I'm working a lot with engagement volunteers to talk about found objects and how people use found objects in their artwork. And I was thinking about the language that you use for passages. Obviously, the name of this is Gates, and you talk a lot about the passage of the soul and kind of a spiritual passage that you're hoping is associated with your work. Would you be able to use that kind of language to talk about the journey that an object in the everyday world takes when you, as an artist, incorporate it into your work, and what we might pick up from it as viewers after it's no longer part of your life and it belongs to this work?
Yeah, because I feel like it's like almost like a transferal of energy. You know, you find something that's like been outside or been used, been in the rain, been in the snow, you know, and has went through all these things, and then it has its own relationship to the world. You also have yours, and then there's a relationship between you and that material, and you repurpose it to create something totally new. And I think some of my favorite sculptures are those that are weathered, used. They have that kind of characteristic or aesthetic to them, you know, even thinking about rubber in its history, you know, thinking about King Leopold, I think the third or the second, and the industrialization of rubber, and the travesties that happened to the Congolese, right? And when I'm stretching the rubber, and I know you're talking about sculpture or ready-mades as well, but you know, thinking about rubber and its histories, right? And I'm stretching the rubber over the surface. There's a later idea where I'm just gonna not paint the painting at all and just leave the material raw. But there's like this like matte depth, darkness about rubber, and then you think about the histories, and there's like a lineage to it, you know? And so I think like, I think all materials, or even just human beings, you know, we all go through things, and we, you know, and so, I think it's really cool when you can, or it's really poignant when you can take materials that have a past and you give it a new future in some weird, in some strange way.
You talked earlier about, my name's John. You talked earlier
doing?
About transitioning from another style of painting into abstract.
Mm-hmm.
And what style was that? I'm just curious.
Yeah, when I first started making pictures, I made like cartoon expressionist paintings. They were very poppy, and even though I was trying to talk about serious themes, they were very like fun images. And after that visit to the Met, I made the decision with myself. I said, okay, you're gonna continue to break yourself down until you get to this abstract place. And so, that was where I went through kind of many of different phases throughout the time that I've been exhibiting publicly to get to where I'm at. But that was where I started.
So, simple question. My name's Matt.
How you doing, man?
Good to meet you.
Good to meet you as well.
So where were you before you moved to Brooklyn?
Before I was in Brooklyn, I was in San Francisco.
Okay.
I went to the Academy of Art University, found my way into freelancing as a graphic designer, and then I moved to LA. Didn't like LA at all. And I had a work trip to New York, and it just sent me. I was like, this is where I need to be. I just felt like I needed to be somewhere that was gonna like challenge me, right? Like as a person, and like, you know, New York is one of them cities that like it fights you back, you know? And, but I was in the Bay and then went to LA. And it was probably the greatest move for me. Now it's, you know, it's home, and I love being there.
So how old were you then when you really kind of took an interest in your art and creating? You called yourself a creator earlier. When did that
I was 23, 4, around that time. My math might be bad, but it was around 2015 when I moved there.
Hi, my name's Courtney.
Hey, how
so
you doing?
Excited to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
What I've been impressed by the most in our talk, or your talk, is your seeking. And you identified as a maker and a creator, and you didn't limit yourself to a medium. And then I've known several artists, and abstraction is something that I think roots an artist who's seeking. And you said earlier you were embarking on that cartoonist expressionism, which is you like communicating an idea directly.
Yep.
And I think it's very interesting in your talk how you have this unknown that you're engaging upon, correct?
Yes,
Right?
absolutely.
Right, so this idea, and you're relating it to your belief and your faith.
Yeah.
And there's still, do you still have questions? Like, you can still have faith, but do you still question it?
Yeah, abstraction is like open-ended.
Right.
And I think that's what I love about it. You know, you could be talking about one thing, and I can like say all I want to say, but you could walk in the room and go, well, man, this makes me feel this,
Right.
or I see this, and I think that's the beautiful thing. What I like about abstraction, but I think my favorite artists, I'm not going to say the best artists, but my favorite artists are those that don't have a style. They have a sensibility. And so when you have a sensibility, then you can use any material on the face of this earth, and you'll build a relationship with that material, and your sensibility appealed through rather than a style. And I think a style sometimes can be hindering, because if it works, if you move outside that style, it maybe can be questionable, you know? People might question it, but I think if you have a sensibility, people can start to get used to seeing you do different things with different materials. I think who's like a really great example of that is the Astor Gates, or Janice Kunelis, or David Hammonds. These are artists that like work with a different or a plethora of materials, but you can tell that it's them because of their relationship with those materials over time. And so I would hope that like I can develop that with myself, I think architects I'm just like having a moment, but it's like they get to do that all the time because they're working with gravel, steel, wood, cement, right? But you can tell like, oh, this is like a David or Jay, based off the way in which they work with these materials. And so I want to have a sensibility rather than a style, because I can continue to search, and seek new ways, new things,
So my follow-up to that is that idea of offering, and I was thinking of you as an artist and how you oriented that against your faith, and that what an offering truly is a sacrifice.
Yep.
Do you have renderings of feelings about that sacrifice, or do you mourn? Do you mourn, or do you celebrate, or do you have a ritual after you complete a piece? I mean, these are some, just like as you said it, like the idea of what an offering is
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't have like a specific ritual that I do, but I often, when I do think about me and the times that I am making, I don't eat a lot when I'm making. I go hours and hours and hours, almost like fast through the process of like making. If, maybe I should be a little more intentional about that to see what happens from that. But yeah, there is a, I guess there's no really, I guess there's maybe these like small ritualistic things, when I'm making the works and I'm stretching them before I start painting them. I sweep my studio, my entire studio. I gather all the debris, I put it in one place. And then after the painting is made, I start to shift through what I can like put back into the work. And I had this concept initially, and Max is here so he knows, because when the Get show happened, I was like, I don't want to show any of these works that we have. Like, I have all these offering paintings. I want to call the show Oblation, and these are like, this is my this is my sacrifice. And he was like, wait, what? He was like, wait a minute. But I do, a lot of the times when I'm making work, I am thinking about hardships that I'm going through in my life, or, you know, hardships that, you know, others that I know, or the state of the world. You know, I think we do have these like moments of like, good, like this is a great moment to meet, you know, you all and speak to you, but there's so much chaos going on into the world, you know? So like when I'm just sitting by myself, and I'm thinking about how maybe like messed up some things are, I'm thinking about that with the work. And that's why like with these offerings, they're really these, I said it a bit earlier, but they're really paintings that I want individuals to go into the space, think about things that they're going through, whether it be problems in the life, family, trauma, anxieties, nervousness, all these things, right? And almost use the offerings almost as like a therapy session, almost, and to relinquish and let go of all those feelings, so that those feelings charge the painting, you know, and then you walk out of the space feeling lighter. And so I know for me, when I'm making the work, I'm letting go of whatever I'm dealing with, you know, and a lot of the times I walk out of the studio and I'm like
a point of reflection.
Yeah.
A point of a giving over to and recognition,
Yeah.
even of, and then that was, and my final question, I promise I'll give the mic back. Final question is, have you ever been in a shared space with someone who didn't know who you were and witnessed their reaction to your work? Me too.
So you're saying being in the space with...
Yeah, where you just encountered them and almost you could, well, now I'm scripting an encounter, but like saddle up to them and go, what do you think? You know, like.
But they don't know I'm the one who made it.
Yes.
No, I haven't.
Oh, I hope you do at some point.
Yeah.
You have time to try it in the next couple of days.
Everybody pretend you don't know who he is.
Thank you